The summit chamber of Iliara Prime was everything Commander Hallie Stroud had been warned about, and more. Layers upon layers of sacred nonsense piled atop glittering nonsense. The domed cathedral station shimmered with gravitational harmonics and sentient crystal chandeliers that hummed in 432 Hz frequencies, supposedly tuned to the emotional wavelength of interspecies harmony. Great. Stroud rolled her neck, popped a crick, and clomped through the radiant archway in sneakers older than most of the assembled dignitaries. The air was thick with ceremonial incense, smelling, in her esteemed opinion, like the aftermath of someone trying to saute moss in disappointment. And all eyes snapped toward her as the chamber of accord fell into silence, one of those impossibly reverent silences that normally precedes planetary genocide or the unveiling of a new protocol scroll. Hallie didn't pause. She strode in humming Beyoncé's Run the World, sipping coffee from a mug emblazoned with the words, "Peace wasn't built in a day, but I can break it in 5 minutes." Her free hand held a foil-wrapped breakfast burrito, which she unwrapped, with the focus of a demolitions expert mid-mission. Somewhere in the far row, a Zorthan delegate dropped a sacred orb in horror. "Sorry I'm late," she said, nodding at the 12-foot-tall insectoid presiding over the room. "Your shuttle barista doesn't know how to make a flat white. Galactic tragedy, really." There was a universal intake of breath. Insectoid antennae stiffened. Plasmic robes rippled with psychic turbulence. The Javathi delegation began vibrating, audibly like someone had microwaved a bag of wind chimes. Hallie took a bite of her burrito and chewed thoughtfully. And seriously, who greenlit that ceremonial fog? Smells like burnt algae and regret. A high-pitched keening began from the Duvaran monks on the eastern dais, signaling either religious ecstasy or ritual offense, possibly both. Across the chamber, Protocol AI Orcs 9 emitted a strangled whine, jittered, and visibly rebooted. A column of ceremonial steam rose behind it in what was probably not a planned feature. "Stroud of Earth!" boomed the Vexari Empress Lul Quen, extending 3 glittering tentacles in accusation. "You have disrespected the grand opening of the Unity Pact Assembly." Hallie shrugged. "What can I say? I'm not much of a robe and chant kind of gal. But hey, I brought snacks." She unzipped a pocket of her navy coat and revealed a small tray of espresso chocolate bombs wrapped in crinkled red foil. Earth's most holy relics, caffeinated sugar bombs. Blessed be the glucose. Delegates recoiled. Several ducked behind their ceremonial shields. A Marnaxi delegate attempted to throw sacred dust in the air but choked instead. Lulquen hissed something in untranslated Vexari, but the translator politely rendered it as, "Please perform the spiral dance of apology or face expulsion into the void of penitent reflection." Hallie, unfazed, sipped her coffee. "Look, I could attempt your sacred dance thing, but I've got 2 left feet and a history of destroying rhythm-based cultures. Let's not add insult to interstellar injury." She began walking toward the central dais, trailing the scent of burrito and dark roast. Cries of alarm echoed from the Breluvian archivists as her boots, unblessed, unlevitated, unadorned, stepped onto the sacred mosaic floor of the inner ring. Hallie turned and raised an eyebrow. "Let me save you all 12 hours. You don't want another treaty. You don't need to spend 5 days chanting over a scroll written in 4 dying languages while sipping fermented fog water." She set the tray of chocolate bombs down on a pedestal meant for the chalice of eternal accord. "What you need," she said, unwrapping another foil, "is a snack, a blunt conversation, and maybe some therapy." The Darthan overseer, ancient and ossified behind layers of ritual bone armor, blinked slowly. Then he chuckled. It was the sound of old gravel sliding across time. "Finally," he muttered, "someone's got the spine to insult our furniture." Hallie grinned. "You're welcome." Behind her, the Javathi's harmonic vibration changed pitch, ever so slightly. Less horror, more curiosity. Someone asked what chocolate was. Someone else asked what a flat white meant. A Sulian monk sniffed her burrito. "This," Hallie said, waving her half-eaten wrap like a peace treaty, "is how Earth does diplomacy. Unfiltered, uninvited, and wrapped in foil." She took one final sip of coffee and faced the assembled galaxy. "And we're just getting started." By the second day of the summit, though technically no one had agreed on whether Galactic Standard Time or Eliara's triple lunar orbit dictated the schedule, Commander Hallie Stroud had already committed what the Zorthan Protocol Codex defined as irreversible diplomatic blasphemy, no fewer than 8 times. She wore a leather jacket instead of a silk phase robe, sat cross-legged on the prayer cushions of consensus, which were absolutely not meant for sitting, and worst of all, had redecorated her personal quarters with string lights and a miniature espresso machine named Frank. The Vexari Empress had threatened formal censure. The Javathi threatened to sing a lament that could split moons, and the Briluvian archivists wept over the fact that she had used one of their sacred historical manuscripts as a napkin. Orcs 9, the summit's once unstoppable protocol AI, now suffered unpredictable mood swings, occasionally screaming, "Unauthorized humor detected," before shutting down mid-sentence and rebooting with what sounded suspiciously like passive-aggressive jazz. But Hallie remained unbothered, even as she marched back into the central chamber that morning carrying a tray stacked with syrup-drenched waffles and steaming mugs. "All right, murder muffins," she called out cheerfully to the gathered dignitaries. "Let's talk peace treaties and trade violations while we overdose on carbs like rational adults." Gasps, of course. Audible antennae twitches. One of the Zorthan high priests began convulsing in ceremonial distress. But no one stopped her. Not after yesterday. Because while Hallie's sarcasm had offended every tradition in the room, her snacks had hit like spiritual revelations. The Darthan overseer, Cholthax, previously known for ending negotiations by launching asteroids, was now openly sipping cocoa from a world's okayest overlord mug and nodding thoughtfully as Hallie presented a revised resource-sharing map using jelly beans to represent star systems. "The Solari keep rerouting their mining fleets through Javathi space," Hallie explained, pointing with a cinnamon stick. "I get it, they want the Nutrium, but that's like trying to sneak through a dragon's den wearing barbecue sauce. You'll get sung to death, which incidentally is how I want to go." A Javathi elder let out a single melodic note of what might have been reluctant agreement. A Sulian monk, previously devoutly silent, raised a hand. "Would it be possible," he asked cautiously, "to obtain the recipe for the circular sugar-drenched bread you call donut?" Hallie didn't miss a beat. "Buddy, I've got it laminated. It's on the back of our Constitution." She passed out copies. Someone cheered. Several delegates blinked in unison, a galactic gesture of cautious hope. Lul Quen, still deeply unimpressed, attempted one last maneuver. "Your flagrant violations of formality risk destabilizing a peace process centuries in the making." "Formality is why nothing's gotten done," Hallie shot back, swirling her coffee. "You've spent 100 years arguing about how to word an apology for a war no one remembers starting. You want peace? Start with pancakes. People don't declare war when they're mid-syrup." The Vexari bristled, and the chamber tension began to tighten again. Hallie sighed, reached into her coat, and with the solemnity of a field medic reaching for a final dose of morphine, pulled out a bag of Earth's last weapon, espresso-infused truffles. "These," she said slowly, "are triple caffeinated, sugar-enchanted, and have personally ended 4 family feuds at Thanksgiving. I am not afraid to use them." A pause. And then the unexpected. The Briluvian archivist, a species so formal they once declared eye contact a breach of etiquette, raised a trembling hand. "We downloaded your cooking shows. They are compelling. The one called Gordon yells with divine fury." "Yeah," Hallie grinned. "We call him the Spice God." Laughter. Honest-to-goodness galactic laughter. Hallie sat, down on the orb of collective consciousness again, eliciting only a mild psychic shriek this time, and spread out napkins and blueprints simultaneously. As the morning wore on and the sugar buzz took hold, something miraculous happened. Delegates began to speak plainly. Accusations, truths, secrets long buried under incense and bureaucracy bubbled to the surface, eased out between bites of croissants and diplomacy. The Zorthan Accord, once the embodiment of tradition fossilized into paralysis, was, against all odds, starting to talk like real people. Somewhere in the background, Orcs 9 softly played lo-fi earth jazz. The Galactic Summit wasn't collapsing. It was transforming. And Hallie, with her sneakers on sacred carpet and coffee in hand, was just getting started. By the third cycle of the summit, measured by the number of times Orcs 9 had catastrophically rebooted and come back with new culinary subroutines, Commander Hallie Stroud had done the unthinkable. She'd made the galaxy's most sanctimonious diplomatic complex feel like a badly run brunch spot with surprisingly good service. Gone were the long, droning preamble chants. Now delegates greeted each other over cinnamon rolls and cold brew coffee like old co-workers at a reluctant family reunion. The sacred orb of collective consciousness had a permanent coffee ring on its crystalline base, and no one had even tried to purify it in 12 hours. The Vexari Empress still hadn't smiled, but she had stopped trying to have Hallie exiled into the void of reflective atonement, which, by local standards, was progress. Hallie entered the main hall that morning with purpose and a duffel bag. She casually walked up to the center pedestal, dropped the bag with a thud, and unzipped it to reveal 3 things: a holographic display unit, a paper bag full of breakfast, tacos, and the single most offensive act in the history of the Zorthan Accord, a pair of fuzzy blue socks with the word "Nope" printed across the toes. "Okay, truth bombs incoming," she said, pulling out a mini projector and activating it with a smirk. The hologram that flickered to life showed a neatly organized chart, glowing with hard data on resource hoarding, falsified diplomacy logs, and something she titled The Great Spice Heist, in which 3 star systems had covertly rerouted cargo through neutral trade zones using ceremonial dance ships as cover. "Turns out," she said, while tossing a taco to the Darthan overseer, "half of your sacred agreements are built on passive-aggressive sabotage and bad PowerPoint slides." The room went silent. Delegates leaned in. The Breluvian archivist nearly dropped his spoon. "Also," Hallie continued, switching slides, "someone's been selling communication encryption codes to the Groll Syndicate in exchange for, get this, Earth pickles. I mean, I get it. They're crunchy, they're tangy, but espionage via cucumber? That's a new low." The Javathi delegate began vibrating again, but this time it wasn't horror. It was restrained laughter. The Sulian Triarch covered his face in prayer robes, likely to hide a smile. Hallie paused dramatically, picked up the final item from her duffel, and casually tossed it onto the orb, a small, glittering metal plaque that read, "Earth's first intergalactic cafe franchise proposal. Here's my counteroffer to centuries of soul-draining ritual, cultural cafes everywhere, open seating, no robes, strong coffee, and shared recipes. Food truce zones on every neutral world. If you can eat with someone, you can't be at war with them, or at least not until dessert." Lul Quen's facial tentacles stiffened. "You mock diplomacy with brunch?" "No," Hallie said, eyes flashing. "I replace diplomacy with something that works. You've got enough sacred protocols to strangle a black hole. You don't need more scrolls. You need a taco truck." That did it. The Darthan overseer slammed his mug down and let out the low, grinding equivalent of a guffaw. "She's right," he said. "We've turned peace into performance. Maybe it's time we turned it into participation." The archivists whispered among themselves. The Sulayans shared soup recipes. A Yalari, who had not spoken since the beginning of the summit, raised a delicate claw and asked if tea would also be served. Hallie's grin widened. Tea, coffee, fusion dumplings, diplomacy donuts, name it. Earth's got flavors you haven't even weaponized yet. Orcs 9, now displaying a chef's hat and apron across its interface, quietly chimed in. Uploading galaxy-wide flavor profiles, calibrating for maximum piece-through-pastry efficiency. No one even questioned why the AI had developed a preference for bagels. That afternoon, the sacred halls of Eliara Prime rang not with chants or holographic decrees, but with the clatter of cutlery and the haggling of spice swaps between mortal enemies. The orb of collective consciousness, now covered with sticky notes, food stains, and a rotating dessert menu. And Hallie? She was already sketching trade corridors on the back of a burrito wrapper, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, laughing with a Duvaran monk over the ethics of sauce sharing. The revolution hadn't come through war. It had come through waffles, and the galaxy was hungry for more. By the fourth and final day of the summit, though by now time was measured less by orbital calculations and more by how long the coffee held out, Eliara Prime was almost unrecognizable. The sacred hymn chambers had become communal kitchens, incense altars repurposed into dessert buffets, and Orcs 9, the once hallowed protocol enforcer, now proudly displayed today's chef's special on every screen, spicy truce noodles with a side of accidental forgiveness sauce. Commander Hallie Stroud, in her battle-worn sneakers and now iconic "Nope" socks, stood at the center of the former circle of infinite deliberation, now flanked by makeshift food stalls and delegation seating that included beanbags, folding chairs, and one Breluvian cushion throne now occupied by a very satisfied-looking Darthan Overseer. Her voice carried clear across the dome, over the sizzling of waffle irons and the murmurs of tentative trust being built between centuries-old enemies. "All right, nerds," she began, biting into what was allegedly a Sulian fusion pastry, but tasted suspiciously like cinnamon chaos. "It's time to make this official. We've danced the burrito waltz, we've cried over dumplings, we've had psychic hangovers from over-caffeinated accord sessions. But now we need to write something down before someone replaces all this with a committee." She tapped her holopad, projecting the document she'd been working on for the past 36 hours. The Culinary Accord, written in plain language, spiced with commentary, and ending with a clause requiring every signatory to host a food-sharing festival at least once per planetary cycle. It included flavor clauses, cross-cultural snack rights, and a proposed council of cafes, a neutral advisory group with rotating hosts and potluck obligations. There was silence, heavy and expectant. Then a sudden scraping sound, Empress Lulquen rising from her ornate platform, arms raised, tentacles unfurling. Everyone held their breath. "This treaty," she hissed, her voice a melodic mix of disapproval and reluctant awe, "is a flagrant violation of every diplomatic structure we've ever built." Another pause. Then she added, "And I will personally sponsor the first Galactic churro exchange." The chamber erupted, not in war cries or formal chants, but cheers, whoops, actual laughter. Delegates embraced, traded recipe chips, and toasted with bubbling flasks of various alien beverages, one of which caused a Javathi delegate to temporarily phase through 3 dimensions in joy. The orb of collective consciousness glowed with a kind of shimmering amusement, perhaps sentient enough to realize it had just been used as a serving platter for spiced meatballs. As the summit dissolved into a festival of culinary diplomacy, Hallie found herself leaning on a railing overlooking the Eliara skyline, stars blinking above, the space lanes already buzzing with rerouted trade vessels and flavor caravans. Beside her, Chulthax the Darthan sipped delicately from a cup of earth chai. "You've altered the accord," he murmured, "possibly irreparably." Hallie smiled. "Good. It was brittle. Fragile things break, but flexible things bend, adapt, and taste a hell of a lot better with garlic butter." Orcs 9 beeped, as it hovered by, projecting a holographic mug with Hallie's face on it and the words, "Peace through pastry, Hallie Stroud, Ambassador of Chaos." "Oh, hell," she muttered. "They've merchandised me." Indeed, Chulthax nodded. There is already a line of hot sauces. The Vexaris is reportedly weaponized. Below, the first official Galactic cultural cafe was being erected. A neon-lit hub with 1,000 smells, colors, and overlapping conversations in every tongue from every quadrant. It wasn't sacred, it wasn't perfect, but it was alive, real. A place where people didn't chant for peace, they chewed through it. And as Hallie turned to go back down, sleeves already rolled up for another shift of cooking, trading, and gleeful treaty-breaking, she muttered with a smirk. You ever tried ending a war with a donut? Wild, I know, but turns out deliciously effective. Peace hadn't arrived with a sacred flame or 1,000-signature scroll. It came on a plate, with a side of irreverence, extra spice, and enough caffeine to fuel a revolution.